Some songs do more than top the charts. They define a generation, capture a moment, and become the soundtrack to memories that never fade. The 1960s gave us an explosion of rock and roll unlike anything before or since, when vinyl records flew off shelves by the millions and certain singles became cultural landmarks. If the golden age of rock music speaks to you the way it speaks to so many of us, consider subscribing so you never miss a journey back through the songs that shaped our lives. Number 10. Hey Jude by the Beatles. Released in late 1968, this remarkable song broke nearly every rule of pop music at the time. Clocking in at over 7 minutes, radio programmers initially worried it was simply too long to play. They were wrong. Completely wrong. The track held the top spot on the American Billboard Hot 100 for 9 consecutive weeks, the longest run of any Beatles single in the United States. Paul McCartney originally wrote the song for John Lennon's young son Julian, intending to comfort the boy during his parents' divorce. The working title was Hey Jules. That tender origin, paired with the soaring 4-minute sing-along coda, gave the world a song that felt less like a record and more like a shared embrace among millions of listeners. The single was released on August 26, 1968, as the very first record on the newly formed Apple Records label, making it a commercial and symbolic landmark simultaneously. It debuted at number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and climbed steadily to the top, eventually selling over 8 million copies worldwide in its first release alone. That repeated na 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 refrain, which McCartney himself initially considered a throwaway placeholder, turned out to be the emotional engine that carried audiences across generations. Number 9. I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles. The arrival of this single in America during the winter of 1963 and early 1964 changed popular music forever. It was the song that launched Beatlemania across the Atlantic, selling well over 1 million copies in the United States before the band even set foot on American soil. By the time the 4 young men from Liverpool stepped onto the stage of the Ed Sullivan Show that February evening, the country was already in love. Capitol Records, which had previously refused to release Beatles material in America, suddenly found itself pressing copies around the clock. The single spent 7 weeks at number 1 and effectively opened the door for what we now call the British invasion. Capitol had passed on releasing 3 earlier Beatles singles in the United States, including Love Me Do and She Loves You, decisions that company executives would spend years quietly regretting. It was only after the band's manager Brian Epstein personally negotiated a $75,000 promotional commitment from Capitol that the label agreed to push I Want to Hold Your Hand with full force. That investment paid off spectacularly. The Ed Sullivan performance on February 9, 1964, drew an estimated 73 million viewers, roughly 40% of the entire American population at the time, making it one of the most watched television broadcasts in the history of the medium up to that point.
When I touch you, I feel happy inside.
Number 8. I'm a Believer by the Monkees.
Love was out to get me. That's the way it seemed.
Written by a young Neil Diamond and recorded by the 4 members of a manufactured television band, this track became one of the biggest-selling singles of the entire decade. Released at the tail end of 1966, it shot to number 1 in the United States and stayed there for 7 weeks. The pre-orders alone reportedly exceeded 1 million copies, an astonishing figure for the era. Critics at the time loved to dismiss the Monkees as nothing more than a Beatles imitation built for television. The record-buying public did not care. Davy Jones, Mickey Dolenz, Peter Tork and Michael Nesmith had delivered something irresistibly catchy. What lasted was the song itself. Decades later, it found a whole new audience through a famous animated film, proving that a great melody never really ages. It just waits for the next generation to discover it. Neil Diamond composed the track in under an hour and was paid a flat fee by Screen Gems Music, receiving no ongoing royalties from what became one of the decade's defining recordings. The Shrek soundtrack in 2001 introduced the song to children who had no idea a real band had recorded it 35 years earlier, generating a fresh wave of sales and streams that reminded the music industry how durable a perfectly crafted pop song can be. Number 7. Sugar Sugar by the Archies.
Sugar, oh, honey, honey.
Here is one of the strangest stories in the history of rock and roll. The biggest selling single of 1969 in the United States was not performed by a real band at all. The Archies were a fictional cartoon group based on the characters from the Archie comics, with studio musicians and session singers providing the actual sound. Despite the unusual setup, Sugar Sugar was an undeniable hit. It spent 4 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and went on to sell millions of copies worldwide. Ron Dante, the lead vocalist hidden behind the cartoon, became one of the most successful unknown singers of his time. The song reportedly was first offered to other artists, including, by some accounts, the Monkees themselves, who turned it down. That decision became one of the great what-ifs of 1960s music. The cartoon band laughed all the way to the bank. Jeff Barry, who co-wrote the song with Andy Kim, produced the recording sessions in New York using a deliberately simple arrangement, keeping the production light and airy so it would translate cleanly through the small speakers of transistor radios. The strategy worked perfectly. Sugar Sugar ultimately sold over 6 million copies globally, outperforming every release from Woodstock artists that same summer, a fact that infuriated serious rock critics and delighted absolutely everyone else. Number 6. The Ballad of the Green Berets by Staff Sergeant Barry Sadler. Not every massive hit of the decade came from long-haired rockers in psychedelic shirts. In 1966, an active-duty Army medic named Barry Sadler topped the charts with a solemn, patriotic tribute to American Special Forces soldiers serving in Vietnam. The song spent 5 weeks at number 1 and became, by many accounts, the best-selling single of the entire year in the United States. It was the rarest of crossover hits, embraced by audiences who normally tuned out anything resembling military music. Sadler himself had served as a combat medic and lived the experiences he sang about. The success was not built on slick production or studio magic. It was built on sincerity, on a moment in American history when families gathered around their televisions every night watching news from a faraway war. Sadler had been wounded in the leg by a punji stick booby trap in Vietnam just months before he recorded the song, and he performed it at the White House for President Lyndon Johnson in early 1966, while the single was still climbing the charts. RCA Victor pressed over 1 million copies in the first 2 weeks alone. The album of the same name reached number 1 as well, making Sadler the only combat veteran to simultaneously top both the singles and album charts during the Vietnam era. Before we continue our countdown, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from fellow music lovers across the country, and it is always a treat to see which songs on this list brought back the strongest memories for you. Number 5. Aquarius and Let the Sun Shine In by the Fifth Dimension. Taken from the groundbreaking Broadway musical Hair, this medley became the defining single of the spring of 1969. The Fifth Dimension, a vocal group from Los Angeles, transformed 2 songs from the show into one continuous 6-minute experience for radio. The record spent 6 weeks at number 1 on the American charts and sold millions of copies. It captured the optimism of a generation caught between protest marches and moon landings, between Woodstock and Vietnam. The The lush production, layered harmonies, and the soaring crescendo of the second half made it impossible to ignore. Marilyn McCoo, Billy Davis Jr., and their bandmates won the Grammy for Record of the Year. The single remains one of the most successful crossover hits ever recorded, embraced by pop, soul, and easy listening audiences alike. It was the sound of America trying to believe in something better. Producer Bones Howe recorded the medley at Wally Heider Studios in Hollywood, spending weeks crafting the orchestral arrangement that bridged the two distinct songs into a seamless whole. The single reached #1 on April 12, 1969, just 3 months before Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, and many listeners later described the two events as emotionally intertwined, both feeling like proof that the impossible was suddenly within reach. Number 4, Are You Lonesome Tonight by Elvis Presley.
Are you lonesome tonight?
Released in November of 1960, just as the new decade was beginning, this haunting ballad showed a softer side of the man who had defined rock and roll in the previous decade. The song was actually written back in the 1920s, but Elvis transformed it into something entirely new. The famous spoken word middle section, where Presley recites lines borrowed from Shakespeare's As You Like It, became one of the most recognizable moments in popular music. It spent 6 weeks at #1 in the United States and sold well over 1 million copies in its first run. For older listeners, the song was a revelation. The wild young man who had scandalized parents just a few years earlier was now crooning a tender ballad their grandmothers could love. Elvis Presley was not just surviving the new decade, he was about to dominate it all over again. Colonel Tom Parker had specifically urged Elvis to record the track, believing it would broaden his appeal beyond the teenage audience that had made him famous. Parker was right. The song crossed demographic lines that few pop records managed, landing on both the country and rhythm and blues charts simultaneously while topping the pop chart, a commercial sweep that no other artist achieved that year. Number 3, Tossin' and Turnin' by Bobby Lewis.
I couldn't sleep at all that night.
This was the song that simply would not leave the top of the charts in the summer of 1961. Bobby Lewis, a Detroit-born singer with an extraordinary voice, scored what became the biggest single of the entire year in the United States. It held the #1 position on the Billboard Hot 100 for 7 consecutive weeks. The driving beat, the punchy horns, and Lewis's unforgettable opening line about lying in bed unable to sleep made it the kind of record that turned car radios up to full volume. For a single summer, Tossin' and Turnin' was inescapable. It played at every backyard barbecue, every drive-in movie, every transistor radio at the beach. Lewis never quite matched its success again, but he did not need to. He had given the world one of those songs that defines an entire season for everyone who lived through it. The record was produced by Jackie Capp and released on Belltone Records, a small independent label that lacked the promotional infrastructure of major companies like Columbia or RCA, making the song's 7-week chart dominance even more remarkable. Lewis had spent nearly a decade recording for various labels without a breakthrough before Tossin' and Turnin' finally connected, a reminder that persistence in the music industry sometimes rewards patience in ways that overnight success never quite can. Number 2, We Can Work It Out by the Beatles.
Think of what you're saying. You can get it wrong and still you think that it's
The entire decade quite matched what came next. Number 2, We Can Work It Out by the Beatles. Released in December of 1965 as a double A-side with Day Tripper, this single became one of the fastest-selling records the Beatles ever issued in the United States. It reached #1 in early 1966 and showcased a more mature, contemplative band. Paul McCartney wrote the optimistic verses while John Lennon contributed the darker, more skeptical middle section. The result was a perfect blend of their two songwriting personalities, a musical conversation between hope and doubt. The The harmonium part, played by George Harrison, gave the track its distinctive sound. For families watching the Beatles evolve from mop-topped teen idols into serious artists, this song marked a turning point. They were no longer just writing love songs for screaming teenagers, they were creating small masterpieces that adults could appreciate. The Fab Four were becoming the most important musical force of their time. The double A-side format itself was a bold, commercial gamble, essentially asking radio programmers and record buyers to choose between two equally strong tracks. Most stations played both heavily, and the strategy resulted in Day Tripper charting strongly in its own right, while We Can Work It Out claimed the top position. Capitol Records shipped over 1 million copies in advance of the official release date of December 3rd, 1965, and stores sold out within days across major American cities. And now, before we reveal our top spot, we would love to hear from you. Which song on this list takes you back the furthest? Which one still brings a smile to your face every time it plays on the radio? Tell us in the comments below. Number 1, Hey Jude returns, but our true number 1 is the Beatles once again with She Loves You. Released in the United States in 1963 and re-released to massive success in 1964, She Loves You became one of the best-selling singles of the entire decade in America and around the world. In the United Kingdom, it was the best-selling single of the entire 1960s, a record it held for many years. The instantly recognizable "Yeah, yeah, yeah" refrain became a cultural shorthand for the whole British invasion. Parents heard it constantly. Teenagers screamed it at concerts. Radio stations played it on heavy rotation across the United States as Beatlemania reached its peak. What makes the song so enduring is not just its commercial success, it is the pure, infectious joy of it. The harmonies between John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison locked together perfectly. Ringo Starr's drumming pushed everything forward with a gentle urgency. Producer George Martin captured lightning in a bottle. Looking back now, more than 60 years later, it is remarkable to think how much of our shared musical memory comes from such a small handful of years. The 1960s gave us songs that have outlived their original audiences, their original radio stations, even their original record labels. They live on in oldies stations, in films, in commercials, in the humming of grandparents doing dishes in their kitchens. These were not just hit records, they were the soundtrack of a generation that is still here, still listening, and still passing the music down to anyone willing to listen. And that, more than any chart position, is the truest measure of a song's lasting power.